Okay, this is Leviticus 11, verse 22. These you may eat: the locust after its kind, the destroying locust after its kind, the cricket after its kind, and the grasshopper after its kind. I remember when the first time I pulled into Hong Kong back in the 1970s when I was in the Navy, I got some chocolate-covered grasshoppers. And they tasted pretty good, and they got a crunch to them too. But all other flying insects which have 4 feet shall be an abomination to you. By these you shall become unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them, that shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries part of that carcass, or any of them, shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. The carcass of any animal which divides the hoof, but is not cloven hoofed, or does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Everyone who touches it shall be unclean. And whatever goes on its paws among all kinds of animals that go on all 4s, those are unclean to you. Whoever touches any such carcass shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries away any such carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. It is unclean to you. These also shall be unclean to you among the creeping things that creep on the earth: the mole, the mouse, and the large lizard after its kind, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand reptile, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. These are unclean to you among all that creep. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening. Anything on which any of them falls when they are dead shall be unclean, whether it is any item of wood or clothing or skin or sack. Whatever item it is in which any work is done, it must be put in water, and it shall be unclean until that evening. Then it shall be clean. Any earthen vessel into which any of them falls, you shall break, and whatever is in it, it shall be unclean. In such a vessel, any edible food upon which water falls becomes unclean, and any drink that may be drunk from it becomes unclean. And everything on which a part of any such carcass falls shall be unclean. Whether it is an oven or a cooking stove, it shall be broken down, for they are unclean and shall be unclean to you. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern, in which there is plenty of water, shall be clean. But whatever touches any such carcass becomes unclean. And if a part of any such carcass falls on any planting seed which is to be sown, it remains clean. But if water is put on the seed, and as a part of any such carcass falls on it, it becomes unclean to you. And if any animal which you may eat dies, he who touches its carcass shall be unclean until evening. He who eats of its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. He also who carries his carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And every creeping thing that creeps on the earth shall be an abomination. It shall not be eaten. Whatever crawls on its belly, whatever goes on all 4s, or whatever has many feet among all creeping things that creep on the earth, these you shall not eat, for they are an abomination. You shall not make for yourself abominable with any creeping thing that creeps, nor shall you make yourselves unclean with them, lest you be defiled by them. For I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore consecrate yourselves, and you shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall you defile yourselves with any creeping thing that creeps on the earth. For I am the Lord, who brings you up out of the land of Egypt, to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. This is the law of the animals and the birds and every living creature that moves in the waters, and of every creature that creeps on the earth. to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, and between the animal that may be eaten and the animal that may not be eaten. Now, in 1932, scientists came up with the electron microscope, and a PhD professor by the name of Dr. Peter J. D'Adamo, and then his son took over his work because they only had one electron microscope. Stanford University Medical Research School. Dr. Peter D'Adamo was a PhD professor there, and he had access to the electron microscope. And so the electron microscope verified all of God's food laws. Now, God's food laws, these are written, Leviticus 11 is written 3,700 years ago. And the electron microscope, that's almost 100 years ago that we've had the electron microscope. Now, this is Leviticus 12. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, If a woman has conceived and born a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days, as in the days of her customary impurity, she shall be unclean. And on the 8th day the flesh of her foreskin shall be circumcised. She shall then continue in the blood of her purification 33 days. She shall not touch any hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purification are fulfilled. But if she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, as in her customary impurity. And she shall continue in the blood of her purification 66 days. When the days of her purification are fulfilled, whether for a son or a daughter, she shall bring to the priest a lamb of the first year as a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove as a sin offering to the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then he shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her, and she shall be clean from the flow of her blood. This is the law for her who has born a male or a female. And if she is not able to bring a lamb, then she may bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. One is a burnt offering, and the other as a sin offering. So the priest shall make atonement for her, and she will be clean. Now this is Leviticus 13. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, When a man has on the skin of his body a swelling, a scab, or a bright spot, and it becomes on the skin of his body like a leprous sore, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons the priest. The priest shall examine the sore on the skin of the body, and if the hair on the sore has turned white, and the sore appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a leprous sore. Then the priest shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. But if the bright spot is white on the skin of the body, and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and his hair has not turned white, then the priest shall isolate the one who has the sore 7 days, and the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. And indeed, if the sore appears as it was, and the sore has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall isolate him for another 7 days. Then the priest shall examine him again on the 7th day, and indeed, if the sore has faded, and the sore is not spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. For it is only a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab should be at all spread over the skin after he has been seen by the priest for his cleansing, he shall be seen by the priest again. And if the priest sees that the scab has indeed